I still remember the first time Sarah knocked on my door. It was one of those afternoons when the sunlight felt too bright, and the silence of my new apartment was deafening. I'd moved here just weeks ago, and the fresh start I'd been chasing had only left me feeling more untethered. Sarah wasn't what I expected from this quiet neighborhood. She had this way about her. Confident, warm, but with a sparkle of something mischievous. That afternoon, she leaned against my doorframe like we were old friends. Her caramel waves bounced as she laughed at some joke I barely caught. "You're the new girl, right?" she asked, her smile widening. "I'm Sarah. I live a few doors down." I nodded, nervously tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Nice to meet you. I'm Emma." "Emma." She said my name like she was savoring it, her gaze sharp but friendly. "You should come over sometime. My husband, Mark, and I host little gatherings. Super casual, just good wine and better company." I smiled, unsure how to respond. There was something disarming about her, like she knew things about me I didn't even know about myself. She didn't linger long, just left me with a breezy "think about it" and a wave as she sauntered away. For the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about her offer. Little gatherings sounded innocent enough, but there was a knowing look in her eye that hinted otherwise. Every time I saw her or Mark, her handsome, easygoing husband, the air between us felt charged. It was subtle, fleeting glances, the way Sarah's fingers lingered on Mark's shoulder as they talked. They seemed too perfect, too synchronized. Like they shared a secret the rest of the world wasn't in on. It wasn't long before I found myself standing at their door, my heartbeat fluttering as I knocked. I told myself it was just neighborly curiosity. After all, what harm could come from meeting a few people? But deep down, I knew I was chasing something more, a thrill I hadn't let myself admit I craved. Sarah greeted me with a glass of wine and that same knowing smile. "Welcome," she purred, her hand lightly brushing mine. Her apartment was dimly lit, the air perfumed with something rich and intoxicating. It wasn't the kind of space you decorated for company. It was a space meant for moments. "Mark's just grabbing a few things from the kitchen," she said, ushering me toward a cozy leather couch. I hesitated for a beat, taking in the scene. A group of people, all effortlessly poised, lounged in the soft glow of the room. Their laughter was easy, but their eyes carried the same spark I'd seen in Sarah's. As the evening unfolded, I found myself drawn in. The wine was smooth, the conversation flirtatious without crossing any obvious lines. It felt like an unraveling, a slow peeling back of layers. I started to notice the way touches lingered just a moment longer than usual, the way laughter seemed to dip into something deeper. Sarah leaned in close at one point, her perfume wrapping around me like a secret. "You're a natural," she whispered, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "I knew you'd fit right in." I didn't know what she meant, not fully. But I smiled anyway, letting the warmth of her words settle over me like a blanket. By the time I left that night, my head was spinning, not just from the wine but from the promise of something I couldn't quite name. As I walked home, the crisp night air stinging my cheeks, I realized I was smiling. For the first time in months I felt alive. And as I unlocked my door, a thought struck me. This was only the beginning. The days after that first evening blurred together, but Sarah and Mark stayed sharp in my mind. There was a pull to them I couldn't explain, a magnetic charm that made the world around them feel pale in comparison. I tried to focus on my usual routine, work, errands, the safe monotony of life, but my thoughts kept circling back to that night. The warmth of Sarah's laugh, the way Mark's eyes held a quiet intensity. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only skimmed the surface of something vast and thrilling. It didn't take long before Sarah found her way back to my door. "This weekend," she said with a playful lilt, leaning against my doorframe like she belonged there, "we're hosting another little gathering. It'll be a bit more intimate this time. I think you'll enjoy it." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "What do you mean by intimate?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, though my stomach flipped. Her smile deepened, eyes twinkling like she knew exactly what was going through my mind. "Just a smaller group. Closer friends. It's a chance to let your hair down a bit more. I nodded, pretending to consider it, though I already knew I'd say yes. The invitation wasn't just to another evening. It was a challenge, a dare to step out of the carefully drawn lines of my life. And so, when Saturday rolled around, I found myself standing at their door again, my pulse racing with anticipation. The apartment was different this time. Gone were the soft touches of casual hosting, the wine glasses lined up neatly on the counter, the polite hum of background music. Instead, the air was heavier, the lighting dimmer. Candles flickered on every surface, casting golden shadows that danced across the walls. The music was lower, bassier, like a heartbeat thrumming through the room. Sarah greeted me at the door, her smile as radiant as ever but edged with something darker. She looked stunning in a sleek emerald dress that clung to her like it was made for her body. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "Everyone's been looking forward to meeting you." "Everyone?" I asked, glancing past her into the room. There were only a handful of people this time, each one striking in their own way. A tall brunette woman in a silky black jumpsuit leaned against the bar, laughing softly with a man whose sleeves were rolled up to reveal strong, tanned forearms. Another couple sat close together on the couch, their legs brushing as they shared a quiet conversation. Mark appeared then, handing me a glass of something amber and potent. His smile was effortless, disarming. "Welcome back," he said, his deep voice wrapping around me like a warm coat. "Thanks," I murmured, taking a sip of the drink. It burned just enough to loosen the tension in my shoulders. The evening unfolded slowly, like a story unraveling one page at a time. Conversations swirled around me, light and teasing at first, but with an undercurrent of something else, something electric. Sarah had been right. This was more intimate. People leaned closer, their laughter softer, their touches lingering. Mark found me at one point, his gaze steady as he handed me another drink. "You seem more comfortable this time," he said, his tone light but observant. "I think I'm starting to get the hang of it," I replied, though the truth was I still felt like I was walking a tightrope, exhilarated but unsure of my footing. "Good," he said, his smile widening. "That's how it should feel, like you're just on the edge of something new." And I was. The air around me seemed charged, every glance and gesture a spark. When Sarah pulled me into a group gathered around the bar, I felt the heat of her presence beside me, her hand brushing against mine as she spoke. The conversations turned more playful, laughter filling the space between murmured words. I started to notice the way the room shifted, the way boundaries seemed to blur as the night wore on. The woman in black leaned into her partner, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his arm. Across the room, the couple on the couch had moved closer, their whispers punctuated by soft, shared smiles. It was subtle but undeniable, a rhythm, a flow that carried everyone along with it. Sarah caught my gaze, her eyes gleaming. "Relax," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the music. "You're here to have fun, remember?" Her words settled into me like a mantra, and I let myself exhale, releasing the last of my hesitation. The room felt different after that. Not just a gathering of people but a living, breathing entity, pulsing with energy. For the first time I felt like I was part of it. Mark appeared at my side again, his presence steady and grounding. "Want to take a breather?" he asked, motioning toward the balcony. The cool night air was a relief against my flushed skin. We stood there in silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling in the distance. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his tone genuine. I glanced at him, then back at the view. "Like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff." He chuckled softly, his hand resting lightly on the railing beside mine. "That's the best part," he said. "The leap is always worth it." I didn't know what he meant, not fully. But as I stepped back inside, the warmth and energy of the room wrapping around me like a second skin, I felt a thrill I couldn't ignore. Whatever this was, wherever it was leading, it was something I wanted to be part of. I wasn't sure when it happened, when the room shifted from something intimate and playful to something that felt almost hypnotic. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow unraveling, like a thread being pulled from a tightly woven fabric. I could see it in the way people moved, the way their laughter dipped into quieter, more conspiratorial tones, and the way Mark and Sarah exchanged those knowing looks that made me feel like an outsider and an accomplice all at once. It was almost midnight when Sarah brushed past me, her perfume trailing behind her like a ghost. "Come with me," she murmured, her lips curving into that signature smile of hers. I didn't hesitate, I couldn't. She had this way of commanding attention without demanding it, like the world simply bent to her will. She led me to a smaller room at the end of the hallway, its door slightly ajar. The space was cozier, with a low couch and soft golden lighting that made everything feel warm and a little hazy. A couple was already there, seated close enough that their hands intertwined on the cushions between them. The man had a sharp jawline and an air of quiet confidence, while the woman leaned into him, her laughter like music. Sarah settled next to them, patting the empty seat beside her. "Join us," she said, her tone light but carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before sitting down. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to breathe, to relax. The wine I'd been sipping all night had done its job. My usual overthinking was dulled, replaced by a strange, floating sense of curiosity. "This is Anna and Chris," Sarah said, gesturing to the couple. "They've been coming to our gatherings for years." "First time?" Chris asked, his voice smooth, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. Anna smiled warmly, her gaze kind but sharp, like she was assessing me. "You're in good hands," she said, and somehow the words felt like both a reassurance and a warning. The conversation flowed easily after that, though I barely remember what we talked about. It was like the words were just background noise to the tension building in the room. Every laugh, every glance, every brush of a hand felt deliberate, charged. I caught myself leaning forward, hanging on every word, every movement, as if I were being pulled into a current I couldn't resist. And then Sarah's hand was on mine. Just a light touch, her fingers barely grazing my skin, but it sent a jolt through me. "You're doing great," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine with a warmth that melted the last of my nerves. "Just let go. Let go." The words echoed in my mind, loosening something deep inside me. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding on to myself until that moment, and as I exhaled, I felt a strange lightness, a sense of freedom that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Anna leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper as she spoke to Sarah, though I couldn't make out the words. Chris's gaze flicked between them and me, his expression unreadable but calm. It was like they were orchestrating something, though I wasn't sure what. Mark appeared in the doorway then, leaning against the frame with that easy smile of his. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. "Perfect," Sarah replied, her hand still resting lightly on mine. She turned to me, her smile widening. "Emma, why don't you and Mark get some air? I think you've earned a little break." Her suggestion felt like a command, and before I knew it, I was following Mark back down the hallway, through the living room and out onto the balcony. The cool night air hit me like a splash of water, clearing my head just enough to make me aware of how much I'd let myself sink into the evening's rhythm. Mark leaned against the railing, his hands loose in his pockets. He didn't say anything at first, just let the silence stretch between us, comfortable and unpressured. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "How are you feeling?" I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "It's a lot," I admitted finally. "But not in a bad way." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Can be overwhelming at first. But you're handling it well." There was something about the way he said it, like he was reassuring me but also testing me. I met his gaze, searching for something. Confirmation, maybe, or a hint of what was coming next. But his expression was calm, unreadable. "You're not like most people who come here for the first time," he said after a moment, his tone almost conversational. "You're open, curious. It's refreshing." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just smiled faintly and looked out at the city lights. The tension between us was subtle but undeniable, a thread stretched tight between 2 points, waiting to snap. He didn't push, didn't pry. Instead, he just stood there with me, letting the night settle around us like a blanket. And in that moment I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the room I'd just left, not of Mark or Sarah, not even of myself. For the first time in a long time I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When I stepped back inside, the atmosphere had shifted again. It wasn't dramatic or jarring, but it was unmistakable. The music seemed softer, the lighting warmer, the air thicker with something unspoken. I could feel it in the way people moved, the way conversations dissolved into smiles and touches. The evening had reached its tipping point, and I was standing right on the edge of it. Sarah was waiting for me near the bar, her smile radiant, as though she could see straight through me. "Feeling better?" she asked, her voice honey-smooth. I nodded, gripping the glass Mark had handed me earlier. "Much. Good." Her hand found mine again, and this time the touch felt deliberate, almost grounding. "Because the night's just getting started." Her words carried an unspoken promise, one that sent a shiver down my spine. She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Instead, she led me back into the room, where the small group had started to dissolve into more intimate clusters. I caught glimpses of the others, Anna and Chris leaning into each other, their laughter replaced by whispers. A man with dark eyes brushing a stray hair from a woman's face. His movements slow and deliberate. It wasn't chaotic or rushed. If anything, it felt natural. Like everyone had silently agreed to let their walls come down. Sarah guided me toward the couch where Mark was seated, his expression as calm and steady as ever. He looked up as we approached, his gaze flicking between me and Sarah with a hint of amusement. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Mark patted the seat beside him, his smile widening. "Please." As I sat down, I felt Sarah settle on my other side, her presence warm and steady. For a moment, the three of us just sat there, the hum of the room surrounding us like a cocoon. It was quiet but not uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like the calm before a storm, not a destructive one, but something powerful and inevitable. Mark leaned closer, his voice low and soothing. "You've done well tonight, Emma." I looked at him, searching his face for the meaning behind his words. "What do you mean?" He exchanged a glance with Sarah, who smiled knowingly. "It's not easy," he said. "Letting yourself be here, really be here. But you have. That takes courage." His words settled over me like a warm blanket, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to exhale fully. I didn't think I could, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But now, I don't know. It feels like I've crossed a line I didn't even know was there. Sarah's hand found mine again, her grip gentle but firm. "That's the beauty of it," she said. "Once you cross it, you don't go back to who you were. You become something more." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. And in that moment I realized she was right. This night, this place, these people. It wasn't just about curiosity or thrill-seeking. It was about shedding the weight of who I thought I was supposed to be and stepping into a version of myself I hadn't dared to imagine. The rest of the night unfolded like a dream. The boundaries I'd clung to so tightly dissolved, replaced by an openness that felt both terrifying and freeing. I let myself be present, let myself feel without questioning every glance, every touch, every breath. When I finally left, the sky was just starting to lighten, the first hints of dawn painting the horizon in soft shades of pink and gold. Sarah and Mark walked me to the door, their smiles warm but unspoken. "Will I see you again?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but filled with certainty, like she already knew the answer. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and sure. And as I stepped into the crisp morning air, I felt lighter than I had in years. This wasn't just a night I'd remember. It was a turning point, a moment that would ripple through the rest of my life. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into their apartment hours earlier. And for the first time that didn't scare me. Thrilled me.